Alright everyone. Hello, I am Led Ostrich, and I'm going to do a little tutorial today on the Antics Blaster trick. This trick was fairly recently discovered in August of 2023. I'm making this video in October of 2023, so there are still a few things that are not fully understood about this trick and may change in the future as we understand more. But the current research has kind of died down a little bit, and people have sort of settled into their initial strats that they're going for this trick. So I think it's time to at least get an initial tutorial out there to explain the trick, some setups, and kind of walk through all the details, and then we'll see how this evolves over time. But just to first demonstrate the trick, it involves this steel keg on Elevator Antics, and I don't remember if the elevators can actually spawn here. It's not, so just show the trick real quick. I'm going to show the safe Diddy setup real quick here just to demonstrate how it works. There it is. You can see that it involves the blaster barrel that normally would return you from the second bonus in Elevator Antics, and using an invisible object with the steel keg to modify the behavior of that blast barrel. Hence the name Antics Blaster. So now that we've seen the trick briefly, I want to go ahead and talk about how it affects the route for all stages at least. This trick is also applicable to Modern Old Summon and RBO and Warpless. Those categories can take advantage of this trick, but I'm mostly focusing on all stages when I'm talking about the routing changes. And this trick does change the routing quite a bit in World 5. Changes the route through potentially 5 out of the 6 stages. Because in Oil Drum Alley, it is no longer necessary to do a damageless setup for the super jump roll in that stage, which most people find easier and is about 1 to 2 seconds faster than if you do a damage full version that loses Donkey. So you can enter Elevator Antics with just one Kong. You don't need to enter with both Kongs like you would if you were doing the Antics super jump roll, which was the strat, the fastest strat known previous to this. So it changes the routing in Oil Drum Alley there. You'll also, if you have just Diddy Kong, you'll save a little bit of time in Trick Track Trek from entering as solo Diddy, since you save time on the overworld for only having one Kong. And then after Elevator Antics, it is helpful to have, if you have both Kongs, you'll want to switch to Donkey in Poison Pond. Play Poison Pond as Donkey, and then there is a faster way you can play Minecart Madness when you have both Kongs and you start with Donkey in front. I'm not going to go into too many details on those things. There are some other videos that should be on the wiki to explain those changes, but those are differences from the previous strat where we were doing the super jump roll here. And it's slightly important because you will see that I try to end Elevator Antics with both Kongs so that I can get the time save from the Minecart Madness routing later. But I'll mostly just be focusing on this trick, the Antics Blaster, during this tutorial. So the overall, compared to, I guess this is probably one of the biggest things that everyone wants to know too, how much time does this trick save? Well, this trick, over the old optimal route, which was doing damageless SJR in Oil Drum Alley, and then the most optimal version of the SJR in Elevator Antics, it is possible with the fastest version of this strat to save about 10 seconds over the fastest version of the old strats. About 9 or 10 seconds is like the absolute ceiling of how much you could possibly save. In reality, you're probably on average going to be saving less than that, especially if you choose one of the setups that intentionally loses some time for consistency. But I know that's one of the big questions that everyone will want to know. So there you go. It saves 9 to 10 seconds maximum. The other nice thing about this though is that if you choose one of the safer setups, it is pretty easy to do. So even a beginner to speedrunning Donkey Kong Country should be able to choose one of these safer setups and still do this trick relatively easily. You know, you might be a little slower at it at first, but it is consistent and it saves a lot of time compared to playing the whole stage. Whereas the super jump roll in this stage would have been something that normally you would want to wait until after you've had some experience running the game to learn. So that is another nice advantage here, is that this trick can be quite beginner friendly. So let's, I think that kind of covers the routing changes. Let's kind of go, I'm going to go into a little bit on, you know, how does it work now? If you don't care how it works and you just want, you know, teach me how to do the trick, I just want to see how to do the trick, I don't care how it works, you can go ahead and skip ahead down to the variance section, pick, you know, go ahead and watch the setups down below. But I'm going to go into a little the background on how this works for those that are interested, and so that people can have a little more information and hopefully help further refine these strats going forwards. It kind of helps to know how it works a little bit. So like I mentioned, though, we don't fully understand how this strat works, so there are a couple of mysteries that have still yet to be solved here. But in short, I believe I have a save state, this save state. Okay, so in short, here's the thing. Everything that you play in Elevator Antics up until this point pretty much doesn't matter. So you can play Elevator Antics until you get to this point, right where there's this room with the snake barrel in it. And the rope, just going to show some of the stage here, and the save barrel. Like right when you get to this section of the stage, this is what matters. So right here is where things start to matter. And just to briefly give, I'm not going to even go super in depth on how it works, but just to give an idea of how it works. What's happening is, in this game, there are designated object slots that are reused for everything in the game. Everything from these ropes to the bees, to the snake spawner, to the blast barrel that we're interested in, the mini necky, the nuts that the mini necky shoots out. All of these things are objects in the game, and each time the game wants to spawn an object, that object needs to take up one of the object slots that's available. And there's only so many slots. I think there's like 14 slots that are available for objects to load into. And objects will always, when they need to load into the game, they will always load into the lowest object slot that is available. Object slots like 0 and 1 or actually object slots 1 and 2 are reserved for Donkey and Diddy. Donkey and Diddy always get those slots. So object slot number 3 is really like the lowest slot that's available. It's not super important to know that, but the two setups use either object slot 3 or object slot 4 to perform this trick. And what's happening is when you grab the steel, I'll do the safe setup here just to show. This is using object slot 4, but what's happening is there's a glitch, and you may be familiar with this glitch, the invisible object glitch, because it's used to do some wrong warps elsewhere in the game. When you throw a steel keg and recatch the steel keg, and then break it into a halfway barrel, the keg breaks, but the game still thinks Diddy or Donkey is holding an object. And so the object slot that keg used to be taking up is now free for a different object to use. So the game thinks that the keg's gone, so a different object can now use that slot. But the game also thinks that Diddy is still holding the object that was in that slot. In this case, what we want to do, for the wrong warps that you've seen maybe in Any% or RBO or some of the other categories at Old Summon, whenever we do a wrong warp, we do the same type of thing where we take an invisible object, this is what we call an invisible object after we've broken the keg and we're just holding nothing. And the wrong warps work by loading a bonus entrance into the same slot that the keg used to be in. And then you can modify the bonus entrance by like throwing or placing down the keg, the invisible keg, and it modifies the bonus return value to take you somewhere else other than where you were originally intended to be taken back to after you complete the bonus. We're doing something similar here, but we're modifying, instead of wrong warping, we're actually modifying the blast barrel in a way that it shoots us to coordinates that are way out of bounds, and then the camera basically zooms way to the right after we get launched out of bounds, and it actually manages to, we're really lucky this works, but it happens to load the exit and allows you to exit. So you're actually, when you perform this trick, you are you're not actually wrong warping necessarily. You're being shot like to coordinates that are way far to the right, and the camera tries to catch up, and you are actually exiting. As far as the game is concerned, you're actually exiting the stage using the normal exit of the stage, and not actually like wrong warping out of the stage. Like for example, the platform perils wrong warp. This is a very different mechanic behind the scenes compared to what you see in platform perils. Just to clear that up. And so now that we have an invisible object, you need to have consistent movement that is going to cause the bonus return barrel to load into the same slot as this barrel as the keg used to be in. So in this case with the safe setup, we're using object slot 4, and the reason for that is whenever you come back here and you rub up against this wall to get a really consistent movement, and you jump to the left and just walk to the left, or run to the left, I guess, while holding the barrel. If you do that movement, the bonus return barrel will always end up spawning in object slot 4. So the setup leading up to this point makes sure that the steel keg loads into object slot 4, and that way it's very easy to load the bonus return barrel also into object slot 4, so that we are modifying the bonus return barrel. So you can see when I walk like that, that should cause the bonus return barrel to always spawn in object slot 4. Now what you saw there, though, I did that little double jump. We'll get into the setups in a minute. But here's the other strange thing about this trick. When you're doing a wrong warp, you're just modifying the bonus entrance one time, and that's it. So there's a lot of different ways you can do the movement. It doesn't really matter. Like, as long as the object IDs line up correctly, it's going to work. But with this trick, I believe that we're actually modifying the barrel in a couple of different ways. We're actually modifying it more than once to make this trick work. And so what that means is just getting the bonus return barrel to load into the same object slot as the invisible object is not enough for this trick to work on its own. You also need it to be modified in a couple of other ways. And one of those ways we don't even understand at all yet. And one of those ways I'll explain here. So to do the safe setup again, this movement makes sure that we get object slot 4, the bonus, the keg here. So here's the other thing. I just want to explain this real quick. If you notice, while Diddy is holding the steel keg and moving, you'll see that Diddy's walking animation changes every few frames, and the keg is actually slightly oscillating up and down. You see that, like the keg, like during Diddy's walking animation, the keg moves kind of goes up and down like every few frames. It's kind of wiggling with Diddy's walking animation. Well, what's happening when you break the so if I throw the steel keg and recatch it, which is necessary. Oh, I forgot to do this. Okay. Throw the keg and recatch it so that we can break it. Now, the same thing is applying here. There's obviously there's no steel keg anymore, but the game is still trying, as Diddy moves every few frames when his walking animation changes, the game is trying to adjust the position of the object that Diddy is holding. And that's important because if you were to, for example, well, so that's where there's two modifications happening to this return barrel. And so without doing the setup properly, if you drop the barrel and enter the return barrel, this can happen. And what this means is you got the correct object lined up, but you didn't get the extra modification. And so if you only modify the return barrel by dropping the invisible object with Diddy, this is the behavior you'll get, which I call the sinking golden barrel. So if you get the sinking golden barrel, that means that you only got the modification from dropping the steel keg, and you need to also get the modification from the walking animation kind of jostling the bonus barrel as well. And there's actually a third factor, like I mentioned, that we still don't understand. So that's why the setup, which I think I have a better save state, or I can probably just use this save state. So this save state, yeah, it's just a little further ahead, so I don't have to repeat that whole setup. So when you break the keg, there's an additional thing that needs to happen. The bonus return barrel needs to spawn on the same frame that Diddy's walking animation or Donkey's walking animation changes, and that the barrel would also be changing positions. So that needs to happen so that you get an additional modification before you drop the steel keg, and those two modifications combined, along with the third factor that I don't fully understand yet, those things lead to the blast behavior that we see rather than just the sinking golden barrel. So there you can see I did a double max jump there to manipulate where Diddy's walking animation will be on the frame when the barrel is spawned, so that we guarantee that the barrel spawns on the same frame that Diddy's walking animation changes, and then we drop the barrel and jump off the mini necky and into the bonus, and we get the blast behavior. Now I'll quickly talk about the third factor we don't understand yet, just so that it can help anyone else that's looking into this in the future. So right now, the best known like safe setup involves going through this crawl space rather slowly, jumping up here and waiting for this mini necky to drop down and shoot this third nut. And so the nut that the mini necky shoots is still spawned here and is taking up an object slot. And then the idea is that you want to run, kill the clump, and then grab the steel keg. This movement guarantees that the steel keg is in slot 4, so that we can do the safe setup, but it's a couple seconds slower than it could be, right? Like if you were to just play this section as quick as you could, even if you do this part slow, in theory you could play this section really fast and you could actually still get the keg to spawn in slot 4 by doing some faster movement. But what's strange is that if you don't wait for that mini necky to shoot the third nut, you won't get the blast behavior. So there's another factor that has to do with like objects inheriting some properties of other objects or animations or something like that that's going on as well that is not fully understood. Here's another thing to mention too. My game just crashed. When you're first practicing this trick, you will probably experience your game crash quite a few times, because there are a number of ways that if you go off the guardrails as far as one of the setups is concerned, if you accidentally load the mini necky into the same slot that the steel keg was in, the game crashes. So this is something to be aware of, and something that will probably happen to you quite a few times when you're first learning it. But once you get the setup that you decide to choose down, you shouldn't be at too much of a risk of game crashes anymore. But it is something you will need to look out for at first, and you just have to reset your game to get back in. So I think that's about all the time I'm going to spend on how this trick works behind the scenes. Like I said, there are a lot more details, and there's still some stuff we don't know yet, but in the interest of time, I'm going to move ahead to actually how to perform the trick now. So when it comes to performing the trick, there are a few different setups that have been worked on, and I will go through them here. There's basically four setups that I would consider viable, which you can see them on the split names here. There's the YOLO Diddy method, the YOLO Donkey method, the safe Diddy method, and the safe Donkey method. And I have them listed in order of fastest to slowest. And hopefully we'll find ways to make some of the safe setups even faster in the future. But for now, this is kind of what we're dealing with the rough time save. So the YOLO Diddy method is the fastest method. So I'll try and show that real quick. I think I have an extra save state here. I don't. So, okay. So you're going to play through Antics normally. you can play through Antics pretty much however you want. I recommend you grab Donkey here for the routing changes that I mentioned. Regardless of whether you're doing a Donkey or a Diddy setup, I recommend that you grab Donkey here. And then up until this point is basically where, you know, that was obviously a really sloppy stage, but nothing really before this point matters as far as these setups are concerned. Yeah, so these are the 4 variants. Let's go ahead and let's start with the YOLO Diddy method. So I'm gonna have to make a fresh save state because this one is by far the least consistent. All right, so you play through Elevator Antics normally here. Grab DK. All right, so if you're doing the YOLO Diddy method, you're just gonna zip through those crawl spaces as fast as you can. Pretty much just go through this whole section as fast as you possibly can. Grab the steel keg. Do that kind of little jump, and then blast. I lost like, you know, a second or so in the actual stage there, so this could have been faster. But that was the general idea. You basically just go through, and once you get the steel keg, you're gonna just kind of do this little hop backwards and drop it and jump in. Like that. Now, if you wanted to, you could do like a max jump here or whatever. There's a lot of like slight variants that you could do. And this is where this method, I put on the split there that it's 33% consistent. And that's because, to my understanding is that Diddy's walking animation changes every 3 frames, right? And so you need the blast barrel to spawn on the same frame that Diddy's walking animation is changed. So if you do absolutely nothing to try and get consistent movement here, and you just break the barrel and you run for it, and you drop the barrel and you go in, you have roughly a 33% chance of the trick working. Now for me it's worked every time here, but I'll show. If I just keep trying it, okay, it worked. Okay, there it failed. And I got the sinking golden barrel, which means that I had the object IDs lined up correctly. It was just the walking animation part didn't work. So if you're doing a YOLO method, if you're doing YOLO Diddy and you get the sinking golden barrel, it was basically just RNG. Like you just weren't on the right frame. Your walking animation wasn't lined up correctly. You did everything else right. It was just not the right walking animation. Now, of course, with enough practice and repetition, it might be possible to, you know, have a success rate that's better than 33%, right? Like if you get really good at landing on the same pixel every single time, then you might see more, you know, a better success rate than 33%. So I would recommend just giving it a try, seeing if you can find something that's semi-consistent for you, and maybe this method isn't, you know, so bad. Maybe this ends up being your preferred method. Like there, I just did it a few times in a row by landing on, you know, trying to land on the same pixel every time, and it mostly worked. But every once in a while, you're going to be slightly off. It's not going to work. And if you're doing one of these YOLO methods, you just kind of have to accept that sometimes it's not going to work, and that's just how it's going to go. But that's the YOLO Diddy method, and so you could see where I like when I'm doing the YOLO Diddy method, I'm trying to land right on this dark spot. So in order to make sure you don't crash the game, this is important. What I use as visual cues, right underneath the save barrel here, there's these 2 stalagmites, like this kind of taller one that's right above, that's sticking out through Diddy's hat, and then this little short one that's just barely taller than Diddy. I use those as my visual cue on where to jump, and then this dark spot on the floor right here underneath Diddy's feet, this is what I use as a visual cue for where I want to land. So what I usually do is I wait until I'm just to the right of this small stalagmite, and then I jump to the left, and then I try and land on the left side of this dark patch on the ground, and then walk to the left. And that's kind of just my visual cue. So I jump, land on the left side of the dark patch, and then go. And you know, it's hard to explain exactly where you want to land because it's just going to take you some repetition, and you know, basically every few there's a bunch of different pixels that'll work here. So you could, you know, you don't have to do the exact same movement that I'm doing. You can find your own spot, but you do need to be careful that if you don't walk far enough to the left, you break the barrel here, there's a good chance that you'll end up crashing the game. And if you walk too far left and you don't go back far enough right when you break the barrel, then the bonus return barrel is actually spawned the whole time, and you need to despawn it and respawn it. So then it won't work ever if you walk too far to the left and don't go back to the right, because you need to despawn the bonus return barrel and then respawn it, basically, in order to make sure that it can spawn into the slot where the steel keg used to be. So that's the YOLO Diddy method. The YOLO Donkey method, let me get back to my reference save state. So, the YOLO Donkey method, I won't spend too much time on it because Silent Wolf has actually already created a video where he gives some tips on, this is his preferred setup, and he gives some tips on like visual cues and stuff for it, but I'll just show it really quick. It's basically the same thing as the YOLO Diddy method. When you get to this point, you want to get through these crawl spaces as fast as you can. You zoom through this section, but then right here, you switch to Donkey, grab the steel keg, and then you basically do the same thing. But, and you know, sometimes it's going to work, and sometimes it's not going to work. I didn't even give it a proper chance there because I didn't enter the bonus barrel. One thing to note with Donkey though, whenever you're Donkey, okay, I missed again. Whenever you're Donkey and you, yeah, you can tell that this is not the setup that I normally do, so I'm not very practiced at it. But if you miss as Donkey, like if you don't get the blast. There, I got it that time. Okay, so at least I showed it off. But if the blast doesn't work with Donkey, you will not get the sinking golden barrel. So that's one thing to keep in mind. You will not get that feedback. If you mess up with Donkey, if you got the object IDs lined up correctly, you will not get the sinking golden barrel. So you won't actually know whether or not you got the object IDs lined up correctly, or if you know, it was if that was the issue, or if it was the walking animation that was the issue. So keep that in mind, that if it's not working for you with Donkey and you're looking for the golden barrel, it won't ever be there. So you only get the sinking golden barrel with Diddy. So like I said, check out Silent Wolf's video if you want some more tips on the YOLO Donkey method. It's only about a second, maybe even less than that, like 3/4 of a second slower than the YOLO Diddy method. And it is more consistent, and the reason is because Donkey's walking animation actually changes every like 2 frames instead of every 3 frames. So when you're just randomly going for the trick, you have a higher chance of the barrel spawning on one of those 2 frames, rather than with Diddy, it has to spawn on one of 3 frames. And so that's why I marked it as 50% consistent. So, but again, you should be able to potentially get a little better than 50% consistency if you really practice the movement and get it down consistently. But that's just kind of the rough idea. So now I want to go ahead and move into the safe setups, because these are the ones that, you know, you lose. So the safe Diddy setup I'm about to show, and I've already kind of used as an example in the intro and everything. It's only about 5 seconds slower than the YOLO Diddy method, but it can be 100% consistent. And by that I mean, if you do the setup properly, the walking animation part of it will always be lined up correctly, and you'll never have to worry about the random chance there, or like the really precise movement. Now, it is important here with the YOLO setups. We were going through this crawl space very quickly, and going through this section quickly, and that's because we were trying to get the steel keg to spawn in a different object slot. But when we're doing the safe setup, you actually need to go through these crawl spaces slowly in order to get the objects to spawn correctly. So actually, the main thing that's important here is this Slippa, the snake, when dies, it's still on the screen until, you know, you can see it exiting the screen there, and then its head's still barely on the screen, and right there, when it exits the screen, now it is fully despawned and the game is no longer keeping track of that. And when you're doing the safe setup, you need that snake to fully exit the screen before this snake spawning barrel enters the screen. That's the important part. So that's why, like I said earlier, everything up until this point of the stage really doesn't matter. But at this point is where it starts to matter. And if you're doing the safe setup, you need to kill the snake and let the snake exit the screen before you enter this next room and spawn the snake spawner. The easiest way to do that safely is to just roll into the snake and let your roll fully finish. So do a roll here and just roll against this crawl space and hold left. And then once the roll ends, you'll start crawling through the crawl space. And you can see the snake is fully off the screen, and now the snake spawner spawns. It is possible to do a little faster, and the way I do it that's a little faster is I roll and jump to kind of cancel that out, and then crawl through and jump. It's about 1/4 of a second faster, but it is a little riskier just because if you accidentally jump into the crawl space, you're gonna mess it up like that. You have to make sure to kind of hit the wall, jump, and then go through. But regardless, it's very safe and like beginner friendly to just roll into the crawl space and crawl through. So I'll show the movement. This is the very, you know, the important part is the very beginning here, but I'll go ahead and show the movement now. So you go ahead and go through here safe, jump, just do a jump, and then just run into this crawl space and also just crawl through it. And this is important to get certain objects to spawn correctly. This is very consistent. Once you get through here, you're gonna see the mini necky shoot 1 nut, 2 nuts, and then you wanna wait here for him to turn around and shoot the 3rd nut to the right. So there's the 3rd nut. Now I waited pretty long. The idea with this 3rd nut is there's something we don't fully understand about the trick that this 3rd nut's actually necessary, but another thing that it's doing is it's going to help make sure that objects spawn in the correct object slots behind the scenes for this setup to work. So the main thing with this nut is this nut needs to still be on screen, or at least it needs to still be spawned. It can be slightly off screen, but it needs to still be, you need to make sure you don't despawn this nut until after the clump spawns. So this clump here on the right needs to spawn before the nut despawns. But you need the nut to despawn before the steel keg spawns. And it's a very wide window for this to happen, but those are the important things here with this setup. So we go through here, and actually I can probably just go ahead and move my save state now, because I've explained this part. 3. So this nut, it still needs to be on screen when the clump spawns. So there he is. You can see the nut and the clump have spawned. And then what I normally do is I roll here to despawn the nut. Now I'm way ahead of the nut, right? It's gone. It's been despawned. And the steel keg is here in its place. It takes up the same slot that the nut used to be in. That's the idea here. So usually it's a pretty wide window, but you know, you want to kind of get the timing down. Now once you've gotten to this point, and you've done the setup correctly, so 3rd nut. Now if you do, here I'll give you a little bit of a hint too. If you do accidentally spawn the nut, if you accidentally spawn the nut early, or like if you accidentally go ahead of the nut, you should be able to slow down. Like if you can recognize it quickly, you can just slow down and wait for the nut to catch up. It can be slightly off screen and still be there. That was pretty good, but if I went a little bit earlier, I could just kind of slow up and wait for it to catch up. If you go late, however, though, then there is one thing you can do if you go late. Because like I said, you need to make sure the nut's not still on the screen when the steel keg spawns. So let's say I go, whoops, I went pretty late. You can go ahead and just roll all the way through this clump and get some extra speed down to that 2nd elevator. And that'll help you outpace the nut and make sure that the nut despawns before the steel keg gets here. So that there's a couple of ways that you can kind of correct for either jumping too early or too late when the nut spawns. But assuming we did it correctly, we get to this point, we grab the steel keg, then we're going to jump back, throw the steel keg, and repick it back up. You have to do this or else you won't get an invisible object. So you can't just hold on to the keg the whole time. Otherwise, when you break the midway point, the steel keg doesn't actually break, and you don't get a invisible object. So it is very important. This is not just like, you know, for speed or to be fancy or something. You have to throw this object and then re-catch it, or else it won't break into an invisible object. So anyways, once we get here, we're going to backtrack with the steel keg, throw it and repick it back up. And then what you want to do here is you want to break the steel keg without really spawning the mini necky and letting it shoot nuts. So you want to break the midway, and then you want to backtrack to this point where you're flushed up against this wall. And this is the part of the setup that's going to allow you to make sure you consistently get the same walking animation frame at the same time that the return barrel spawns. And the way that you can do this is by buffering 2 max jumps and holding left. So you can see on my input display, I'm holding left, and I'm going to do a max jump, and then let go and do another max jump buffered. Then drop the keg, drop the invisible object, and you'll get the blast every time. I'll show that again. So we break it, come back, flush up against this wall. As soon as you're flush against this wall, you can go ahead and jump, but I'm just, you know, going slow here on purpose for tutorial purposes. But then max jump, max jump. That should work every time. So that's where the 100% consistency comes in. Now here's the thing, if you accidentally mess this up, here's what it's going to look like. If I accidentally don't do a full max jump on the first jump or something, you might get lucky, like I just did there, and it might still work, because there's always that 33%, you know, chance that it works regardless. But if you mess it up and you get the sinking golden barrel, then most likely what happened was you didn't do the 2 buffered max jumps correctly. The sinking golden barrel tells you that the object IDs were all lined up correctly. You didn't have the right movement, walking animation frame. And because of this cliff here, it is kind of awkward to do two buffered max jumps, because as you can see, a max jump only gets you a few, you know, pixels higher than the floor is here. So it's very tempting to let go of jump early before you've actually reached the peak of your jump, because you're going to hit the floor soon. And so you feel like you need to, at least for me, when I learned it, I was making this mistake a lot early on, where I was accidentally releasing jump a little early. I wasn't actually getting a full max jump because I knew I was going to hit that floor pretty quick. So you need to make sure that you reach the height of your first max jump before you release B and repress. And so that's the most common mistake, I would say, with this setup that causes it to not work. It is also possible, of course, to do the opposite and buffer this first jump and then do the second one too late. And if you do that, then you can also, you know, the trick can fail. You need to be buffering that second max jump, or else it won't work. And so it is important that you know, I don't know what the exact frame window is, but I'm guessing it's about 5 or 6 frames, where you basically can release the jump and then repress jump to get that buffered second max jump, and it'll work every time if you do that. Yeah, this setup, you know, loses about 5 seconds to YOLO Diddy, but at the you know, gain of 100% consistency once you've practiced the setup enough to where you're getting it every time. So just to show that, I would recommend that people do this method. You know, it saves a lot of time still over playing the stage normally, or even it still saves time over the old SJR. And you don't have to worry about losing your runs here. Until you need the 5 seconds, the 4 or 5 seconds from doing one of the YOLO methods, I highly recommend this. And here's the other thing. I will go ahead and now show the safe donkey method. So the safe donkey method is, if you're having trouble with the safe Diddy method, you just can't seem to get the buffered max jumps down, you can do you can do this with Donkey. It's just slightly slower. So when you get to this point, kind of like with the YOLO Donkey method, you want to switch to Donkey, and then you will throw the barrel, re-grab it, do the same thing where you're going to break it, backtrack. But with Donkey, all you have to do is one buffered max jump. You don't have to do another one. And so, let me go ahead and update the save state here. So with Donkey, just one buffered max jump and hold left, and it'll work every time. So this, I would consider this the easiest setup because you don't even have to worry about the two buffered max jumps. It's just one max jump, which is very easy to perform. And it only is about 1.5 seconds to 2 seconds slower than the safe Diddy method. So just one max jump, walk on over. And you do have to... Donkey doesn't get as much height as Diddy does when you bounce off an enemy. So you do have to kind of make sure you wait until this mini Necky's at about at the height, like his max height, or else you aren't going to reach the bonus return barrel. But that is the safe Donkey method. It is the safest, probably the easiest, most consistent method out of all of them, but it is also the slowest. So it's kind of, pick your poison, try the different setups, see which one you like the most. You can always try one out, and then move to a faster one as you decide you need more time save, or if one's not working out for you, you can move down to a safer one and hopefully find some more consistency. And yeah, I think that pretty much covers the Antics Blaster tutorial there. 43 minutes of Antics Blaster for you. I will maybe edit some of this out since that is kind of long, but hopefully with the splits here, you can kind of tab through the video and find the section that you're interested in. Anyways, if you want to know more details, if you want to help work on even faster variants of these safe setups, I would be happy to work with anyone on that. I'm happy to give any details that I know to help you along. And yeah, thanks for watching. Hopefully this was helpful and you can get blasting.